Welcome back to another installment of Northern Virginia Family Practice's Town Hall Series, and welcome again to all the new attendees this evening. If this is your first time joining us, welcome back for others. Happy that you're all here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Cecily Havert. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a family medicine doctor at Northern Virginia Family Practice. So this is a special edition town hall webinar that we're holding in recognition of Pride Month, a time where we celebrate the courage of the LGBTQ community and look deeper into our own role as allies. So why is this important from a healthcare perspective? And why should a primary care medical office care about this? Well, in order to provide effective, equitable, and respectful medical care, we in the healthcare community must be responsive to the diverse needs of all of our patients. And in fact, our mission statement here at Northern Virginia Family Practice reads, we will provide the highest quality personalized medicine in a compassionate environment for patients and staff, while constantly redefining the standard of primary care through innovation, education, and collaboration. And so tonight we plan to do just this. We plan to innovate, educate, and collaborate. So I'd like to start out by briefly introducing our three wonderful panelists who are joining us this evening. And we are excited for what we're going to bring to everyone. This should definitely be a lively discussion about why we recognize Pride Month and the importance of this, as well as the concepts of cultural humility and using empathy to better understand one another. One would argue that we are all part of the LGBTQ community in one way or another, because this community includes our friends, our coworkers, and maybe even our family and other loved ones. So on to the panel. First, we have two LGBTQ affirming psychotherapists joining us, each who run their own practices. We have Timothy Elliott and Julian Harris. And we also have Will O'Donnell with us, a trans youth and rising junior in high school who has aspirations to be a mental health care worker himself one day, perhaps. I will also add that I have known Will and his mom since he was a baby. So that's my little personal connection with Will. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves a little bit more personally. Timothy, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Cecily. And it's such an honor to be here tonight talking about this really important topic. So thank you for creating this space and bringing us all together. As she said, I'm Timothy Elliott. I'm a psychotherapist and clinical social worker. My practice is in Arlington, Virginia. I've been in the DC area for coming up to 15 years doing this work. And most of my practice is centered around supporting the lived experiences of LGBTQ young people, their families, and helping them really find and live their true authentic self. A little bit about me. I'm a queer gay man. I use the pronouns they and he. Both work for me and feel good for me. I'm a cat dad and a partner to someone who I love very dearly. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm just so excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Great to have you here, Timothy. Julian, you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks for having me as well. It really is an honor to be able to speak to folks tonight on this important topic. So my name is Julian R. Harris, and I'm a psychotherapist and a clinical social worker, like Timothy. I have been practicing as a licensed practitioner for about 8 years, and I am currently licensed in both the District of Columbia and in Maryland. I am also a member of the transgender community, and I began my medical transition about 15 years ago or so, and so I really enjoy working with other trans-identified folks, whether they're binary like myself or non-binary, and sure, being a somewhat of a role model for the youth to see that, you know, things, you can be, you can have a good life, you can have a happy life. I am a bit of a hobbyist. I enjoy biking. I do some art on the side. I play guitar a little bit. So that's me.
Great. Thank you so much, Julian. And last but not least, we have Will O'Donnell. you want to say a few words?
Of course. As Cecily said, I am Will O'Donnell. I'm a 15-year-old rising junior at Easton High School. I've been out as trans since 2020, and I've been using hormone therapy since 2021. So it's been about a year and a half, or just a little bit over a year. I've been an LGBTQ advocate for much longer, though. I've been advocating since around 6th grade for advocate for LGBTQ like mental health care and a variety of other healthcare. Being a teen on the Eastern Shore of Maryland has definitely like widened my perspective for this a little bit, because I moved from a more rural part of Virginia, much like where Cecily is located, and just that shift of perspective and cultural differences definitely opened my view for what we need to, what voices we need to lift up, and what parts of the healthcare we need to improve for the transgender and LGBTQ community alike.
Great, wonderful. Well, I'm just so excited. I'm just listening to you guys give your introductions. I think it's wonderful. I can't wait to move forward here. We're going to do first, in order to make sure that our attendees are also involved and in part of our conversation, we're actually going to throw up a poll. So we'll go ahead and get the first question up there. And I don't know if anybody has used polls before, but feel free to put in your answer. You can click on that. The question, the first one is, do you have a personal connection to the LGBTQ community? Go ahead and we'll put that in. So I can't see the results. I'm assuming that they're coming in. If enough people have listed, we can go ahead and give the results. Okay, so question number 1, do you have a personal connection to the LGBTQ community? 100 people answered, great, 100% of people answered. 85% people say that they have a personal connection to the community. About 15% say that they have not. So we'll explore a little bit about what it means to be part of the community and, you know, as an ally or as a member of the LGBTQ community yourself. So that's the first question. Second question we'll move on to in the poll. Okay, and then do you identify as an ally to the LGBTQ community? So first is yes, I am an ally. Second one is no, I do not see myself as an ally currently. And then the third answer is I don't know if I'm an ally or not. And that's any answer is fine. Okay, it looks like the results are going to be coming up here. Okay, and actually pretty similar to what we got the first time. Yes, I am an ally of 81%. 10% no, I do not see myself as an ally currently, and 10% said I'm not sure if I'm an ally or not. So as we move forward with the discussion, we'll see if maybe you know we understand a little bit more about what our roles could potentially be. So we'll go ahead and just jump into some questions, I think, for the panel. And it doesn't matter, anybody can kind of jump in and answer whenever, whoever wants to go first. But the first question is, as a member of the LGBTQ community, why do you feel that Pride Month is important? Anybody want to go first?
I can speak on that a little bit. And I think, Pride is an extension of the fight for liberation and the fight against police brutality and for equal rights under the law. And so I think it's important to remember, it's important for us all to understand that any rights that have been given to any American, any marginalized American had to have been fought for. None of it was just handed out. So I think it's important to, as much fun as it can be, and it's a time for celebration, it's important to remember that it came from the violence that was experienced in New York at Stonewall.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that it's not all parades and music and everything, although that is a fun part of it, and being able to celebrate and lift your voices is a good part, but it is important to remember some of the history also.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to comment on that? All right,
Fighting for our rights as Americans links as far back as like the Boston Tea Party and stuff like that, but teaching that history, Pride Month is just all about that. It's teaching knowledge for LGBTQ history in a more mainstream, typically more widespread media way that garners more attention, to like direct the movement. And with this attention, we're able to raise awareness of issues currently affecting LGBTQ people, more specifically, like there's been a massive wave of anti-trans legislation as of recent in our Congress. And we're able to raise awareness of those issues, the bills being passed by our Senate currently, discrimination against us in schools, healthcare. And while a majority of these bills fail, it's still important to bring attention to them to see what exactly we can do to prevent further discriminatory action in our government.
Great. Yeah, very, very insightful. I know, Timothy, did you want to add anything about?
Absolutely, I really love, I'll just add to what both Will and Julian were saying. For me, kind of when I think about Pride, it definitely has shifted in the time that I've been out as part of the queer community. I remember my first Pride, it was all about the connecting and the partying and the being visible, going to the parades and the festivals. And it shifted in the years since then and I kind of boiled it down to kind of three components, two of which I think Will and Julian named beautifully. One, for me, Pride is to remember. It's a time for us to remember our forefathers and ancestors, the queer individuals that fought and to give us some of the freedoms and rights and spaces that we have today. It's really a moment for us to kind of reflect on that, to learn from them, and to honor their sacrifice. And for me, it's kind of that remembrance piece, I think, is so important in Pride for me. The second part, I think that Pride is an opportunity to connect with a community, with people both of shared and different lived experiences, but knowing us as human beings, we're beings of connections, that having spaces to do that is just so vital in allowing us to continue living as our authentic self and being able to contribute to the greater society. So that connection is a big piece of Pride for me. The third piece, and Will, I think that you said this beautifully, I see Pride as an opportunity to educate, to elevate voices and experiences of people that may not always be known about or understood. And Pride gives us, excuse me, an opportunity to have conversations like we're having tonight. But it also promotes a normalization around identities that are different from the ones that we may or may not hold, So I think kind of for Pride to me now, it boils down to kind of those three words, the remembering, the connecting, and the educating or normalizing experience.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to sum it up. And I really appreciate, all three of you sort of, giving, your personal feelings as what, Pride does mean to you. Looking at things a little bit differently, what does it mean to be an ally? So, and what is allyship? Can we talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's something that we're trying to, kind of just widen, the ground of LGBTQ. And I think that, bringing allies into the mix is an important next step.
Mm-hmm. I think we could talk about allyship for hours.
Yes.
And then there's so much, so much about what we can do, what we shouldn't do. For me, I'll just kind of, again, center my experience as an ally and in interacting with people who are allies. Kind of at the basis, what I'm looking for as an ally to the LGBT or queer community is a basic understanding of what those identities are. I think a common misconception is that LGBTQ identities are monolithic, that it's all about being gay, that's kind of the narrative that I often hear, right? And understanding even just at the basic level that LGBTQ, even though we put it into this one acronym, it talks about several different identities that humans hold. Just to kind of start with the basics, there's the sexual identity, and that talks about our attraction and what we find attractive and the words we use to describe that. But there's also the gender identity, which is a complex piece as well. It talks about the gender assigned at birth, but the gender expression and that internal state of who we are, gender identity piece too. So kind of at its core, an ally needs to have an understanding of some of the basics when it comes to LGBTQ identities, and not assuming that it's all the same, that one LGBT person is going to hold the same identity or have the same lived experience as another LGBT person. So I'll start there and then maybe kind of toss it out to other people to give their thoughts on what it means to be an ally.
Yeah, I mean, allyship by like basic definition is like standing up for, supporting, and encouraging the people that they're aligned with. Allyship for the queer community is in the same vein, standing up for mistreatment of LGBTQ people when it's like perpetuated, like in the workplace, in school, wherever it's necessary. Taking care of them when they need support, and encouraging family and friends to be allies too. But like you said, Timothy, allies sometimes forget to like promote our voices and what we believe, as opposed to just being like, oh, I'm gonna put you in this little box. While they advocate for change and for others to do better, listening to queer people and the issues that directly affect them is just as important as all of those other things.
Great point, Will. Julian, anything?
Yeah, when I was looking at the questions, I was thinking allyship to me means kind of recognizing another person's humanity. It's, and I think that in order to be an ally to marginalized communities and this, and right now we're talking about the LGBTQIA community, and I think it's important to recognize that the kindness that you can show to a person may be the only kindness that they've had that day, that week, that month, that year, because as Will mentioned, there's all of this anti-trans legislation being proposed. There's lots of rights being discussed about gays and lesbians curtailing rights and freedoms, and it's important to recognize that we may not have the same sexual identity or gender identity experiences, but this person here is a human, and they deserve respect. And I think it's especially important in the healthcare fields, whether it's mental health or physical health, because many people who are on this LGBTQ plus spectrum don't have access to care. And if they do have access to care, there's a reluctance out of fear to seek the services that one may need. So I think part of it is, as far as being allies in this particular, and our fields, is being able to use our privilege in order to support other people who may not be able to, who may not have that. And so that's
yeah, I love all of the perspectives that you offer. I can speak to allyship in the medical field. So one of our, like I mentioned, our mission statement here at Northern Virginia Family Practice is to create a space where everybody does feel safe, and to sort of recognize the individual who's coming to us. And I think that, like you were saying, Julian, about there's people who don't seek healthcare out of fear. And I think that's, so that has to be addressed. And I think by creating a safe space where everybody can feel heard and also seen is very, very important. So so I'm hoping that also that's what this conversation will help us do, is sort of create a feeling of allyship and you know, and acceptance. So moving on to, I think we alluded to this a little bit, is why is it important for the greater community, you know, not just the LGBTQ community and even the ally community, to recognize Pride? And what can this movement teach us about other aspects of and movements within our society? So sort of expanding the movement to how it could be important in a bigger sense. Anybody want to jump in?
I think Pride at its core is like a human rights movement. So it's to advance the rights of us as members of the community, and also advance the rights of others. Because now we have, with Obama in 2015, we have the right to get married, which came as a precedent from the like unified, like between race mixed marriage. And it's just kind of building up that precedent to advance human rights. I feel is a very big part of why Pride is important, and to recognize this aspect is why. And I mean, for the general populace to recognize that we are trying to help people and raise their voices and build a better place for the generations to come is, I feel, the most important part of Pride.
Yep. Great.
Yeah. I mean,
Go ahead, Julian.
I was going to say, you know, I think it's important, Pride is important for the larger society because of the very nature that we still need it. You know, if, you know, Pride gives people an opportunity, especially in smaller, isolated, rural or smaller, isolated, smaller cities, where people don't get to meet with or associate or see other queer folks. So this gives them an opportunity to, I want to say without fear, but I want to, with less fear, to kind of come out, right? And be on the streets, in a neighborhood, in a restaurant, in a bar, at a party where they're surrounded by people who aren't going to harm them. And I think the reason why Pride is still around is because there's still very few places where people can feel a sense of safety just being themselves. And so that's why I think it's important for the larger community. I had been reading the news, and I believe it was in Idaho, there was some white supremacists who planned to storm a Pride parade, and they were, you know, they were apprehended and prevented from being able to do that. But the fact that it's our very existence still enrages people and makes people feel as if they have the right to harm folks still shows me and shows us that our humanity is still not accepted by everyone. So that, yeah, that's my thinking on why Pride is still important for the larger society as a whole.
And Timothy, you want to wrap up the?
Yeah, absolutely. To piggyback off of what both of you, for me, I think it does come back down to community. Like Pride is an opportunity for communities to connect, but also provide visibility on the importance and significance of safer communities, of seeking that space where we can enter in with some sense of, I'm going to be seen, I'm going to be valued, I'm going to be acknowledged, and I don't have to explain myself, which often comes with Pride. And I think kind of expanding that out to the wider community, I think it makes me think of just some of the values of respect of differences, but also the importance of finding safe communities and how powerful that can be in our own individual journeys, but also collective journeys as human beings, navigating this sometimes kind of bizarre world, thinking about what we've come through in so many ways in the past years, you know. So that's kind of what it comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different thoughts and beliefs, different people feeling in lots of different ways, and I think that it comes down to just trying to understand one another a little bit better. And I think that's a good segue into ways that we can do that and sort of meet each other, where we are, and that's sort of understanding what cultural humility is. And so, Timothy, I'm going to ask you, since I think we've talked about this a little bit previously, but can you tell us a little bit about cultural humility and just sort of what this is about and why this is important to this conversation?
Absolutely. So a little history. I won't go into a bunch of history, but it actually came out, this term, in the late 90s from some medical doctors looking at wanting to find a different perspective or frame on how to engage with patients or clients who hold different cultural identities than the provider do themselves. Understanding the importance of culture in providing competent care and meaningful care, or even just accessible care, talking about how if clients are afraid to come to providers, they're not going to come to providers, and that can be a huge barrier to accessing. Kind of at its core, thinking about cultural humility, it's a lifelong process of critical self-reflection into our own beliefs, lived experiences, identities, and biases, oftentimes that are implicit or unknown to us, to really further a deeper understanding and respect of how to connect with other people, to facilitate a conversation and a connection with others who do have different lived experiences and identities from us. When I think about cultural humility, kind of one of the concepts that I was educated in throughout grad school and definitely early on in my profession was cultural competency. And while it's a good frame to have, I love that cultural humility kind of takes it to the next step. Cultural competency implies that there's, at some point, you're going to be competent, or you're going to know enough or know it all, right? Cultural humility takes that and flips that and says that you never truly are going to be a full expert in things that you're not living yourself, right? You're an expert in you, but you can do all of the research, the education, and you still are never going to fully know what the experiences is of another person. And so kind of some of the tenets of cultural humility are this stance of coming from a lifelong learner perspective, that I'm never done learning and that there's always more to learn, paired with that critical self-evaluation and examination of what am I holding? What's my stuff around this? Thinking about LGBTQ identities, that could be just a normalization of we all have a gender and sexual identity. Kind of starting there and understanding what was our journey like and what are some of the messages we received either directly or indirectly from the society at large around LGBTQ identities. Having more direct conversations around that to kind of explore how might those biases come out as we're interacting, or even just as we're thinking about people who hold those identities or communities, LGBT communities. Another piece that really stands out to me about cultural humility is that recognition and active addressing of power dynamic differences. I see this a lot when people come to me in my office. There's automatically a power dynamic difference that they're coming to me as a therapist. And oftentimes people say, oh, well, you're supposed to know how to quote unquote fix me, right? So I kind of in my practice really embrace that and approach saying, hey, I come in with these skills and the education I have, but I am not an expert in you. You know you better than anybody else does, and definitely better than I do. And how can we partner together, co-create a space for your healing journey to emerge? And sometimes that means I'm going to bring in different strategies, but it also means that you need to let me know how it's resonating for you and help me understand you and your lived experiences. So it's kind of putting the assumption away that even though I'm part of the LGBT community, even though I've been doing this work for almost 15 years, even though I've done education and training and trained others to do this work, that I still don't know. So that's the humble or humility piece of cultural humility.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to talk about it, and I love, just talking about, just sort of bringing it into how you, when you practice and you have your own clients come in, and it resonates a lot with me, and when I'm taking care of my own patients and everything, and just sort of really understanding that your patient, the patient is the expert in themselves,
Mhm.
and I'm here, and I can bring certain skill sets to the table, but I really need to get to know where you're coming from. And again, I bring this up a lot, the biopsychosocial model of medicine, or pretty much anything, or it's just the physical part of medicine is just one piece of it. There's there's the psychological and the sociological piece of it, and all of those pieces are important, and it takes some time sort of to understand sort of the whole lens that you need to see somebody through. So anyone else want to talk about cultural humility, add anything?
I think Timothy did a wonderful job of explaining that super clearly. I think also it's important that we develop an understanding of those societal structures that kind of create the type of experience that people are living. And also, in addition to interrogating this continual interrogation of our own the privileges we get as a result of our identities, but also to be willing to change as more information comes our way. It's part of that teachability piece that Timothy was speaking of. When new information comes our way, what do we do with it? So that's all I wanted to add to that, because he did such a great job of explaining that.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love the idea also about changing. Also, humility is sort of like understanding. You might know one thing, and then you learn something different, and then it's okay to change your perspective. It's okay to change that's part of the human experience and understanding one another. So
I think change is a very, very important part of one's development, and being aware of your biases and knowing these other perspectives. Like, I, as like a white binary, like masculine trans male, I have a very different perspective and experience of my life than, say, an African American transgender female who is more institutionally like discriminated against in terms of healthcare and other varieties of medical care. Just finding a way to deconstruct those deeply rooted biases and try to understand it and embrace other perspectives is what we can do to get societal like development, and development for ourselves as well.
great point about the implicit biases. I think that's also something that's important to recognize for all of us, because we all have it. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's without an implicit bias. But I think just taking a step back and being open to recognize where we hold those is important to maybe changing the way we think. So, and I think a lot of this sort of leads us to, kind of the next piece of cultural humility, that, is talking about the empathy. And using empathy and, using empathy through maybe a trauma-focused lens to better understand, to basically set the groundwork for safety and eventually acceptance. So now we're talking, I think, Will, you mentioned, talking about change. So how do we change? So I think that, and change is a difficult thing, sort of if we believe one thing a certain way, I mean, it's really hard to, get our belief system to change. And so I think the concept of using empathy to do that, I think it can be really helpful. And I don't know if anybody wants to speak a little bit more to that.
I think empathy coincided with recognizing the impact of trauma on oneself and others can equally allow us to like see exactly where they're coming from. Like, say there's this religious person and they're like very openly against LGBTQ and they don't want anyone to get hormone therapy, or they think that they should go to conversion therapy. Recognizing that this has been a sort of generational circumstance that has led them to this, and while it is not okay, we need to still grant them room to develop and be like, hey, this really isn't okay, but they've come from this incredibly sheltered background. And while it's very hard for me to empathize with this person, I need to equally be able to be like, hey, this is like, I need to be able to help you to mature your point of view and eventually have yourself like grow. and hopefully be more open to this kind of thing and not as discriminatory in such an open manner. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that was awesome. I love how you said that, and just talking about people who may have different beliefs and using, the empathy as an approach to kind of meet people where they are. And again, empathy doesn't mean endorsement, right? I mean, we just, that's kind of, we're really just trying to understand one another and where people have come, where people come from, on a very basic level. Anybody else want to speak to that?
I think for me, empathy, it's really the foundation of the work that I do, that empathic connection. And it does boil down, Cecily, I loved how you said it. It's the being curious around learning about someone else's experience, right? Mm-hmm. Kind of that stance of, I experience in whatever way feels safe for you to do that. Thinking about the work that I do clinically with clients, that's where I start, and that's probably the foundational skill I use most in my sessions with young people, especially, that we need to feel that we are connecting and that there's safety here emotionally to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued. And so I'm going to sit with you, and if I don't know something, I'm not going to pretend like I know it and then go look it up on Google later. I'm going to be like, ooh, what does that mean? And being okay myself to step into that place of not knowing. That's a skill. That's
humility too.
Humility, and grad school does not prepare you for that. It prepares you for being an expert, so to speak. And I went to grad school a while ago, so maybe things have changed. Hopefully things have changed. But for me, thinking about the significance of empathy, it really is foundational skill in all the work that I do clinically. And I do think, going back to the cultural humility piece, it's foundational in connecting with others in a true, genuine way. Just stepping into a space of, I don't know it all, and I'm not going to assume I do or I should know it all. And I'm going to be open to hearing and learning from you.
Yeah, and I want to say, Timothy, we all laughed when you said, I'm not going to pretend like I know I Google, but that transparency is a vital part of being trauma informed, right? Exactly what you said, being, in order to be trauma informed, we have to provide a sense of safety. We have to be transparency and supportive. Like, those things are the basic components. And when I think of empathy, what I try to do every single day in my practice, I think it's a conscious decision to suspend my judgment. Not center myself and what I would have done or how I would feel or what, those things, that empathy and saying, we are very different people. We have different experiences, and I want to hear you, and I'm going to suspend. And I always imagine, I used to hang up suspenders, and this was when I was younger. I had this to suspend your disbelief, and I would have some suspenders hanging from the ceiling, and I had disbelief to kind of let myself try to be more creative and things of that nature. But I've since learned in this work is suspend the judgment. And that's really helped me.
Yeah, I think that also, we all as human beings just, want to be seen and heard. I think that's something that's very, very important. And, one thing I'll say, I think it's so unique this evening to have, the three of you on this panel, kind of from a generational standpoint. I think obviously you've all lived very different experiences, you're each your own individual person, but from a generational standpoint, I think it's great to sort of, check in with you also, how, and to ask the questions is, how has visibility and being seen changed through the years, even from, when, maybe, Julian or Timothy, when you were, younger, and now we look at Will, coming, kind of going through this at his age. So how are things different? I mean, I don't know if you guys want to make comments on that. I just think it's so interesting to see the evolution of this, of this community.
Mm.
As I was thinking about that question coming into tonight, I remembered that, so I went to school in the 90s, and I remember when Will and Grace came on TV and how
Great
big
show.
that was, right?
Yeah.
And looking back at it and watching episodes now, just feeling so cringy, watching it about how gay identity was portrayed. But that was all we had. And fast forward to now where we have, I can't even think of the last TV show I watched that didn't have some LGBTQ representation in it, and did it in a way that it wasn't about being LGBTQ. It wasn't about their queerness, it was about them as a human, and this was a part of who they were. It was just a normalized experience of they're human, and oh yeah, they're trans, or oh yeah, they're queer, or oh yeah, they're pansexual, and that's part of who they are, but that isn't the main plot line, and isn't something that's causing them huge issues. And for me, that shift is so significant because visibility does matter. And I'm thinking about the TV show Supergirl, how they have a trans character on there. And I think they do it so beautifully that the main character line, you don't know they're trans until it kind of comes out in a conversation, but it's not about their transness. It's just kind of related to something else that's furthering the plot line. And it's just so normalized there that this is just part of who they are. It's not the defining element of who they are, and it allows humans to be seen as just humans. So for me, that I think that has been a shift that I've seen, and the impacts of it, especially in with some of the young people I work with, is just tremendous. It creates safer spaces for them to explore different identities in safer ways, for them to have conversations with their caregivers or parents or people within their community without having the same level of fear, judgment, of rejection, or fear of rejection as maybe was there in the past.
To build off of Timothy's point, I feel that representation in media has grown like so much. Like almost everyone my age has been obsessed with the show called Euphoria, and Euphoria has both a trans female lead and a like on-screen like main character lesbian couple, and that has really helped to, although the serious subject matter, help people see themselves in a character like that on the big screen, where everyone their age is watching the show and seeing it and being like, oh hey, I kind of relate to that. I've known some people who have been like, oh, I really relate to Jules. I've talked to my therapist about this because I really see myself in her. And I mean, surely I can't say as much as you guys because I've barely even been around for like almost 16 years, but having been surrounded in almost pure acceptance of LGBTQ people since I've been born, that's helped me grow leaps and bounds in terms of accepting myself and accepting others. I don't know, just that kind of visibility really it's helped so many people I know, not just in media, but in like just basic like education too, because you're being taught about queer history now, the Stonewall movement, even like the Don't Ask, Don't Tell bill from the Clinton era and how that's been revoked, or the transgender military ban. Just even though I'm not as experienced or well-versed as you all, I can certainly say that it's grown so much.
Will, I mean, that was great. I mean, to give your perspective as a not even 16-year-old to have that much insight, I think is quite phenomenal. And I think thank you so much for sharing that. Julian, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, briefly, I'll just say how wonderful it is now to see that the youth of today don't have to go through as much isolation, maybe self-loathing that the older generation. There was kind of like a conspiracy of silence, right? In my generation. And, I went to college in '98. And so there was an LGBTQ, well, it was a gay and lesbian alliance. So there was a little less visibility and acceptance. And lots of things were just not spoken of. There certainly weren't positive representations in media, but it's really awesome that when I work with younger folks and I see everyone has like a queer friend or a trans friend, and it's just, they're just like, they see each other for the most part, and that I get to witness, is that people are much more accepting, and the youth of today don't have to struggle quite as much as people from me and Timothy's generation and older.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think that now is probably a pretty good time. We're getting close to the end of, well, we've got about maybe 12 minutes left. And I think probably what we should do is maybe just to jump in to see if anybody in the audience has anything to ask us. And you were mentioning, Julian, using the word queer. So there actually is a question, right? That in the chat here, or actually in the Q&A. Can you define the word queer? I tend to see it as being a very negative word, and I think again, this is sort of something that's sort of evolved over time, and it's just a great question. I'd love for you to any of you to speak on that.
Sure. Yes. Especially in the South, I think that it was used as a derogatory kind of a slur, and then it's a word that I like to use for myself, because I'm trans, but I also see myself as pansexual, and I think it's an umbrella term where people can not have to go into great detail, but just to kind of identify as part of the LGBTQ, because some of us are more than just one acronym, so one letter in the so yeah, for some people, I think older generations, I think maybe when I was younger, queer would have been like seen as negative, and then probably in the mid to late 2000s, it started to become like a reclaimed word.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is the context in which it's used,
yeah.
Also too. So anybody else have anything to?
One thing I'll just add to that, a note about language. Language is so subjective to the person who's using it. And so when it comes to language within the LGBT community, I think there are so many different definitions out there. And one of the things that I love, especially about young people, is they're coming up with new terms to describe different ways of being all the time, which I love. I think that it's important, though, that we don't assume that just because we've read what a term means, that we know what it means for an individual that we're talking to. So always coming back, and this goes back to the cultural humility piece, assume you don't know, and lead with asking of, is this a word that resonates with you, and what does it mean for you? Going to what Julian said, queer, I think, does come from very traumatic history. And for some people, it's a very activating and triggering word that reminds them of physical violence or death even, and just being mindful that while the community, especially the younger generation, which props to the young generation for keeping things moving forward, we're going through a reclamation process of reclaiming it. There are some people that it still holds a very negative connotation for.
I can say that it still holds a negative connotation. It entirely depends upon context. I have some people who proudly call themselves queer. They're like, I'm queer and I'm here, I love it. Whereas some other people like use the word in such a derogatory context, like in the classroom or just in public in general, as a term to shame and bring them down. So I think while it has been reclaimed, it is still most definitely used in a derogatory sense. It entirely depends upon context. I personally use it in more of a reclaimed way, but I don't know. I think it really depends on the person.
Yeah, again, and I love what you said about the cultural humility piece of it. If you don't know, don't assume anything. And it's the same thing with sometimes pronouns and everything. If you don't know, don't assume, ask. And it's okay to do that. And I think just sort of creating more acceptance around that curiosity, and again, that cultural humility is like, let's just be humans with one another and ask these questions. If we don't know, let's not assume, and, let our implicit biases sort of take over. So something, just a little bit of relearning. There's actually a really fantastic question in the Q&A here, and I'm just going to read it. It's a little bit long, but so the question goes, hi, as a father of a non-binary child, 9 years old, I'm striving to do everything I can to affirm them, both me and my wife. I use their perceived happiness as a barometer of how I'm doing, but I'm struggling to know what more I can do to love, affirm, and support them. They see a therapist, has already seen an affirming endocrine doctor to discuss blockers, when to start. I've taken them to Pride events. I've supported them in how they want to present. I give them unconditional love, and our home is a safe, warm, loving, affirming home. I've helped my child come out, won their timeline.
I think that means on their timeline, like
I didn't know on their timeline, to their uncles, aunts, cousins, grandparents, who all support and love my kid, and have helped get them involved in a trans non-binary group, a little SMYLS. I've never heard of that group.
Little Smile.
Anyway, yeah, Smiles. Is that what it is, Timothy?
They're great.
Okay. And so I guess I'm asking, what else should I be doing? But I also don't want to smother them. So, I mean, this sounds like an individual who is incredibly supportive. I mean, then you think, just to sort of compare on the flip side, there are a lot of, trans or LGBTQ youth who may not have this supportive of an environment, but this environment seems extremely supportive. And so is there anything more to do, and sort of talk about this, this idea of maybe smothering a little bit too?
Can I say, as a trans person, I will say first, kudos and hats off to you for being such an awesome parent, you and your wife. I think it's important to, you get to observe your child and see how they're feeling, and also but asking them what they need. The other thing that's important to recognize is that transitioning alone isn't going to make you happy. It's a component, the acceptance piece, the being able to use blockers, the being able to be affirmed in your home and with friends. That's one part of the piece of having a complete and fulfilling life. And so I don't want you to worry if sometimes your kid is having a rough day. It doesn't mean that you've all been making the wrong decision. It's important to see this as a piece of the puzzle to have them become the person that they have the potential to be, if that helps.
Yep, beautifully said. Anyone else want to comment on this?
I would say this sounds like an incredible environment for a young non-binary child. I don't have much else to say, but I can add that dysphoria can fluctuate on a day-to-day basis. It can be very severe, which may come across that their happiness is lower, and that may make you feel like, oh, I'm not doing as much of a good job as I can be, but that is not your fault. Dysphoria may lower, it will usually lowers with social and physical transition, but it will never really go away. And knowing that and acknowledging that can help in building a better environment for your child in this circumstance, that you can help mediate the dysphoria when necessary. But generally, I feel that you have, from what you've described, an excellent environment, and I really hope to see your child grow and flourish in this environment.
Thanks, Will. Anything to add, Timothy? I mean, you work a lot with kids.
I do, and I would just echo both what Will and Julian said. I think that kudos to the parents. You're doing something right, that your young person is thriving. I think the only other thing is make sure you're taking care of yourself, because as parents, I think sometimes we forget to do that because we're so focused on making sure our kids are okay. But I'll tell you, the best gift we can give to our kids is making sure that we're okay and that we're doing our own work to get supported, to stay grounded, to processing what's getting activated in us, especially around a transition. And that's the only other thing that comes to mind.
Right, right. We're coming close to the end. There is one other question here in the chat. This is kind of a societal, query here. How can we help to counter the idea that society is becoming more that a society becoming more accepting is confusing kids or making them trans? So now there's this kind of swing over to, that the society is doing something wrong here. Any other thoughts on that?
I'll just say briefly, I think that I've heard that so much, and it's unfortunate because the thing is, when society makes it safer to come out, more people come out. When it's dangerous to come out, more people stay in and suffer in silence. And so you can't make a person trans, you can't make a person gay if to kind of go through this social transition, the lack of acceptance, the fear, the violence that people experience. It's not something that people do willy-nilly because it's a fad. It's just not, there's just not enough reward in that. It's, in my experience, both personally and in my work, it's transition is a life and death experience. The physical and the medical and the social transition are interventions to help one live the best life they can. And as Will eloquently put, the dysphoria lessens and it never goes away. And so there's never gonna, it's not about seeking perfection. It's about finding comfort and safety and a sense of belonging within your own self and your own body. So society's acceptance is great because more people can not worry so much about their physical safety and emotional safety, ability to have jobs and a livelihood, but it won't make won't make your kids something that they're not.
Mm-hmm.
To build onto Julian's point, you can compare statistics of like left-handedness or divorce rate. All of those seem to go up once it was either legalized or stopped being penalized. That, of course, in the modern day, being queer is a lot more accepted. And so that leads to a lot more people coming out as queer. And so that statistic will go up. Society isn't necessarily making your kids trans. It's making them more comfortable to be out and show their real selves to everyone in their lives. And again, being trans or gay or whatever, it really isn't a fad, because if once you tell someone that, it could ruin your life. Like, and just to say that it's for a trend is to entirely negate that sort of effect that coming out can have on your interpersonal relationships. But I just think countering that idea with historical statistics of once something stops being punished or becomes like legal, there'll be more of it,
Mm-hmm.
And to add to that, just kind of thinking about what we know about gender identity development, we're learning more and more, and the research is catching up with it. I think there's still a lot there that we don't know, but the research does not support the social contagion theory that's out there, that as society is becoming accepting and it's being talked about, or kids are attending different GSAs or groups, support groups, that they're somehow catching this identity. It just doesn't work that way. And we're having more and more research, empirically done research, to back that up.
Yeah. Well, this hour has just flown by. I feel like we could probably have a talk for another 6 hours about these topics. I feel like there's so much left to talk about, but maybe we'll just have to have a part 2, Pride part 2 at some point. But, I think that I've really, really enjoyed, having the 3 of you on this panel to discuss. I think it's, it raises awareness, it increases visibility, and if anything, I hope that cultural humility, that concept starts to become a more common piece of how we approach situations that are different, or things that we find confusing, or that we, instead of turning away and saying, oh, that's not something that that I agree with, it's like, well, let's throw some curiosity around that. Let's see how maybe my thinking could be different about this. And I think that it's a great place to start. And I really, really appreciate the three of you coming on once again. Very happy the people that attended. This has been, a wonderful conversation. I hope you join us again at another one of our town halls. We do these every month. Next month we will be, sometimes twice a month. Actually, we had two. This is a special edition Pride Month. Next month we'll be having a doctor speaking about obesity medicine. So another very interesting topic. So that'll be in July, date to be announced, but that's the topic, and we hope to see you again. Thank you again to everyone. I hope you have a good evening. Be safe and be well. Good night.